And we are into another special horror episode of Longbox Punk. That's me. I'm Chris. I'm the Longbox Punk, and I am joined by post-punk, excellent creator and horror fan aficionado himself, Carmen Costa. My dude, thanks for hanging out with me again, especially during the spookiest time of year.
Hell yeah, brother. Thank you for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
I'm glad that you got the wear giant studio headphones memo, so I'm not the only one that's rocking these huge things. They look nice. So
Thanks.
all right, so I want to get into, we've got so many things to get into here. We're going to talk horror, what like the genre as a whole, what you like about it, what got you into it, what keeps you coming back for more. And then obviously we're going to talk Proctor because issue 3 is funding right now on Kickstarter, which is stoked. I've got it linked in this episode description, so it's super easy to tap the link, check it out, back it, find your new favorite horror indie comic. It's super simple. We're going to get to all of those things. So when I first had you on, I know I was like, what's your origin story? How'd you get into comics? But I want to flip it because it's horror. So like, how did you get into and discover horror?
So I grew up, and I not to like talk about the comic, but when we first had our conversation, I told you that like Sam, the character, is kind of built on the blueprints of like some of the funniest women I know, and I had some funny, crazy aunts. So I had an aunt who, she was my aunt's girlfriend at the time, and she's been in my life now for however long, right? I'll be 40 in February, so she's been in my life forever. But she was like, she looked like she should have been cast in the Lost Boys. So you remember, like, if I'm 10, it's 1995, and she was like, a 10-year-old me she was like a dude, like she, like curly mullet, sleeveless denim jacket. But I'm bringing her up because she had me, my cousins, my brother, and again, I'm 10 years old, 8 years old, convinced that she was a vampire.
That's awesome.
And bro.
Like intentionally?
Oh, intentional. like we would have sleepovers over my aunts, and she would like you'd be in bed, and she would just kind of like, and she like, I don't even know if they were like at the time, because I think she talked about it so much. Like we were convinced that like her canines were fangs, like Aunt Lori's gonna. Did you see Aunt Lori last night? I think she came into our room, like really legit. And that was when the horror stuff really started to live in my brain. Like I remember being in second grade. I think I still have it. My mom has it. Like wrote a story about werewolves and vampires. And my older cousin, who was 2 years older than me. So if I'm 10, he's 12, and he was from like Northeast Philly, skater, graffiti, like type, like alt type. He was the first like alt personality I had ever met, but he was always like sneaking movies, and he was watching all of the stuff that I wasn't allowed to watch. So I would hear about these films from him. So I loved hanging out with him because he would tell me about all these movies. And the first movie, it might be it's embarrassing that it's like my first scary movie that like Sleepless Nights. I remember Leprechaun
really
was the first film that just I could not sleep for nights and nights because of Leprechaun. And it's because of my cousin Michael. He spent the night and convinced my parents that it was fine. And we watched Leprechaun, and that was it. And then it went from Leprechaun to Gremlins to Ghoulies. I don't know if you remember those.
I remember Ghoulies, yeah.
I distinctly remember watching Ghoulies Go to College, like all of like those like awful B films, and then finally getting into like, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street and
so you like slowly got to the like very crazy slashers.
Yeah, Alien, like that was another one of those things where I learned, I'm like, oh, this is a horror movie too, like not realizing that that's what that can be.
Yeah.
the idea of aliens and horror was kind of awesome to me and new. Predator, those sorts of things. So that's kind of how my horror journeys began.
Okay.
Leprechaun and Ghoulies.
Speaking of movies that kept you up, so my introduction to horror was Hitchcock.
Okay.
Like a Birds and Psycho double feature that was on like on a Saturday at my Nana's house. And
Whoa.
yeah, my dad came in halfway through the Birds and was like, "What are you watching?" And I'm pretty sure it was the scene where Hitchcock put himself in the movie where his eyes got pecked out.
Yeah.
And I was just like, "I don't know, but this is awesome."
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, "All right." And so he made some popcorn and sat down. My Nana was probably making some homemade meal or something in the kitchen. She used to cook all day on Saturdays for this massive meal on Saturday nights, anytime we were there. And I was just like, "Nana, there's like 4 of us eating. What are you doing?" And but anyway, so like that was my introduction to horror. But the one that got me that I was like, I feel uncomfortable was the first Evil Dead.
Ooh,
Like,
yeah.
that was the one when it was like real people can be possessed and then turn into these awful, terrifying things that they have to lock in the
The
basement.
pencil in the
The
hand.
pencil, yeah. Like, and the grinding around and the raspberry sauce that came out. It was just like I was just transfixed, and I was probably in junior high at the time. And like a buddy of mine brought it over, and because we used to trade houses every other weekend. And like one weekend I was at his house watching stuff and playing video games. Next one he was at mine because we had different video systems. And like he brought Evil Dead over, and my mom had gone to bed. And so we're sitting in the living room trying not to just completely freak out as we're watching Evil Dead, because we didn't want to wake her up because of all the screaming and everything. But yeah, that was the first one that like it was over and we were both like, so
That's
I don't
a
know,
good one.
you want to go play video games or something happy or something? And he was like, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I had neighbors growing up who I was probably 6th grade, and we had a sleepover, and they came from a house where things were a little free and loose, and they brought over Evil Dead, and I remember watching it just thinking like, what? Again, absolutely horrified.
Yeah.
By everything that I saw. Yeah. Yep.
So how did you go from like being terrified by these things to like enjoying and seeking out watching these things? Like how did that transition happen for you?
Oh, so I'm still terrified of these things.
Okay.
Yeah. Full disclosure.
Great.
My wife will tell you, like, I am a scaredy cat. Like, it really, what's funny with me is I am very particular with the horror that I am gonna engage in.
Okay.
I still hate being jump scared,
Mm.
you know, but I really like, I lean more towards supernatural just because I just find it fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm still in 6th grade, dude.
Good.
Like,
Perfect.
Yeah. I still like, I may or may not still on some nights when I have to go into the basement to get the laundry, walk a little faster like than I need to, because dude, I kind of believe in all the weirds. It's just I'm not losing my soul for a towel, dude. I'll wait till morning. It's just not, it's why risk it? Like,
yeah.
You know?
It'll be dry tomorrow.
I've had a bird
awesome.
I've had a bird like somehow end up in my basement before, fly down. I am just.
So you've had like real life just moments of like, I can't, nope.
Yeah.
Canceled.
Yeah. And I just am, I have too creative of an imagination where things just live.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You're driving alone and it's just, yeah, man. But as much as I hate it, it's just fun. I just think it's fun. And the more supernatural, the better, you know what I mean? The thing I don't like though, I don't like, I'm not a huge shock horror guy.
Okay.
And I'm not really like Hostel and even Saw, and a lot of that stuff has never really been my thing. I've definitely been more of the ghosts, borderline thriller, Like Stir of Echoes is one of my
Yeah.
favorite.
Okay.
I mean, love me some Kevin Bacon, but also I just feel like that's a good movie that kind of like lives in your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's got some thematic layers that are really, really fun.
Yeah. I haven't watched that, gosh, since probably high school.
Yeah,
Like it's been a minute.
I'm waiting to revisit it. Oh, another favorite of mine that I've learned to really love are any of the, like, I love Scream. I love any coming of age, like the genre bending. The Faculty
Okay. Yeah.
might be, it's like the Breakfast Club meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah.
One of my favorites for sure.
That's
Yeah.
a fun movie. And that's one that I didn't fully know what to expect when I went to the theater to see it. And I think part of why, like, I still avidly avoid trailers. I hate them
Yeah.
because for me, like, I don't need you to tell me what the movie's going to be about and show me the good stuff. I'm going to see it anyway.
Right.
So just don't show me anything. Like, I
Yeah.
have way more fun going into movies that way. And I've been avoiding, because I was waiting for it to drop for free because I'm broke. Long Legs with Nick Cage.
Haven't seen, I've heard amazing things.
I've only heard amazing things. I have no idea what that movie's about.
Mm-mm.
And I want to keep it that way for when I get to watch it, because like I have way more fun. For me, like, I'm the twisted person that when I see the like super gory stuff now, like the Hostels and even the later Saws, like the first Saw I thought was beautifully done.
Yes,
Like,
brilliantly done.
so good. And then it just got to like, how can we torture kill these people more and more and more?
Right.
And like blood for blood's sake has never scared me other than the raspberry sauce and Evil Dead.
Yeah.
But like once you get to that point, it's like that's not realistic. So now I can just look at it and just think like, oh man, the special effects people had a great time making that movie.
Yeah.
And so I find myself like out of the experience with all of that, which is like, I'll still watch it. It's still fun, but it's not like the stuff that really gets in my brain are the possession type movies, the ghost stuff. Cause I definitely believe in like all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I make the mistake of, so I work from home and I'll watch on my lunch break. I'll just sit here in my office and I'll watch like, 5 terrifying things caught on film exploring urban abandoned buildings.
Yeah.
I'll watch those and I will get terrified. Like, I'll just be eating my salad. It's the middle of the day. And I'm like, I don't, and I'll start like looking over my shoulder. I'll feel the hairs on my back of it. And like, that's the fun of it for me.
Yeah.
Is like, I know I'm like, man, there's no reason to be scared right now. And yet, like, I'm on the edge of my seat, and
that's how you know it's done right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I love just like, I don't really, because I used to sneak downstairs when I was living with my mom and watch scary movies when they had the free trial or whatever. Usually it was the week of Halloween, and they would have free like HBO Cinemax, all the things. And I would sneak downstairs and watch all the horror movies that they were showing. But then I had to turn off the TV and then make my way back upstairs in total darkness.
In the dark.
And like, those were the worst, because it was before cell phones and I didn't want to turn the lights on because then she would see that something in the house was on and she would catch me. And so I had to like run through the house and like bang my knee on stuff and not make a sound. And yeah, those are like formative memories that kids now are like, just turn on your flashlight on your cell phone. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, nah,
go there.
Yeah, you gotta experience that. So
we used to have in high school, we used to have parties out in the woods like all the time. And I guess I want to say I was a sophomore when the Blair Witch Project came out.
Oh, dude.
And we used to have these other parties, not just, this is how much we slum it in South Jersey. We would go to like, there would be a train bridge and railroad tracks, and then there were like these creeks and waterways, and kids would run boats to these peninsulas where we would party. But to get to the boat slip, you had to walk the railroad tracks and you had to pass this like white cross. This like, and you're every time you're just walking by like, man, somebody's got to go. Like, somebody's got to go. Like, this is not going to work out.
I love that you mentioned that, because there's definitely like forgotten memories of stuff that we used to do like that in high school. Like there used to be the like legend of this house, and you would drive through the back roads and all the stuff into like, because Cincinnati's weird. Like if you're within the 275 loop, everything is very urban. It's very built up, very few farms and stuff. The second you cross that highway, it suddenly is like, yeah, there's a town and then all of these farms and then a small little town, and like you have friends in all of those little towns. So we would like, there was a legend of this house that was out in, I think it was out in like Goshen or something. I don't even remember. Like I just remember driving back roads for like 45 minutes. The legend was that if you stopped at this certain stoplight, the lights would correspond to the number of people in the car as you were sitting there. And it was like, no way. So there were 4 of us. We like double dated and drove out there. And there's 4 of us in the car, and we come to the stop, and we get to the stop sign. We look up and there's one light. I was like, see, it's a bunch of, and before I finished it, 3 more lights turned on. And I was like, there's 4 lights. We need to go. Can we go? And like, we're in the middle of nowhere.
And the best part about stuff like that is how you can tell stories. Like, it's just such a perfect avenue for storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, like the best part about horror, in my opinion, is now you get to play, you're free and loose with every sort of narrative device that you want. And if you break a rule, it's fine. Like, there's so much that just can happen that you don't have to explain. The lights come on, your doors lock, or your doors unlock. You know what I mean? Like, all that fun stuff starts to happen.
Yep. Yeah. Did you, so other than that white cross, did you have other, I mean, that's, you had the fact that you had to walk by that. All the ones that I had were like, you were in a car. And so it never seemed that bad.
My buddy's mom, there was a group of us, like I would say my freshman, sophomore year of high school, sort of roughly same time period. We would all go to my one friend's house, and he had like a basement with a pool table, and his mom was like the cool mom that would, you know, let everybody come hang out. But she also allegedly was like a psychic and would break out the Ouija board. Oh, and I don't know if it would be like us just psyching ourselves out or if she was playing around with it. But that was another instance of this regular occurrence of us, Ouija board, basement, ESP type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like a bunch of that stuff just was kind of always in my periphery for one reason or another.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say high school for sure, things ramped up for me. And I don't know if it's because also in high school, I was starting to feel very rebellious of like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And like, you don't want me to see scary movies? Guess what? I'm going to watch all of them. Like NC-17, bring it on. I'm 17, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we used to have, there was a group of us that would get together like every other weekend, and we would do Ouija board stuff and like just weird. That's a whole separate, I could talk about some of the stories from that for hours, because it just like heightened that experience. Cause then when you see it happening in a movie or whatever, like it's that there's that additional layer of like, oh my God, I've had like, yeah, no, they're not moving. Who's moving the thing?
Yeah.
And I think that like what I've kind of learned or been able to identify is that things are scary and terrifying when they're rooted in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So not just like, yes, Alien is a terrifyingly stressful movie because you're dealing with trying to survive in this airship in space. And so like, there's really nowhere you can go. And I love claustrophobic horror anyway. Like that's a whole, I love it. But like for Psycho, the reason that it was so terrifying, and I was talking to my mom about it because we, when she was in like recovery for her amputation, it came on like on the TV. It was on one of the channels, and so I was like, no, like I haven't watched Psycho in years. Let's just sit here and watch it. And so during the commercial breaks, we were talking about like why it was so effective, and it's because like back in the 50s and 60s, anybody had to stop at those little like roadside motels and get a room, and you don't know the person that owns it. And like, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because now that you've seen it, the movie itself might not scare you. But then the next time you're in a roadside motel, you're thinking, is that guy Norman Bates? Does he have a dead mom in the back? Like, and that's, for me, that's where horror hits that special level.
Yep.
And so like when you're creating Proctor, see how I'm wedging us here. When you're creating Proctor, like were you aware of that as something that is that something that you've thought of as you're approaching creating this character?
Well, because Proctor is definitely more like supernatural horror adventure, I kind of leaned into like if this was going to be a movie, there are definitely moments that I've kind of built into the comic where, walking through the catacombs, like there are moments that would be, the moment with the Triton, like there are these horror settings that I really would love to live in. But for me, it was a little bit more supernatural adventure. So I was kind of paying more attention to Indiana Jones, but also like the Monster Squad was a big one for me.
Yeah.
Was it Real Monsters or Little Monsters? What's the Howie Mandel movie with the monsters under the bed?
Oh no, I can see the cover of it.
Yeah, but even that movie terrified me when they get hit with the light and the monster appears. I remember just being like, oh, like just so I would like to eventually do so in Italian and Sicilian culture, it's called like the Malocchio, which is like the evil eye. But in like culturally, I hope I don't get this wrong. It is you can curse somebody, but if you, and I forget if you can curse someone at any time or if not too sure about that rule, but in order to, there's a spell that you can sort of cast or a ritual that you can do that can remove the Malocchio from, so it can remove your bad luck or your evil energy or the evil eye. And it has to do with like water and oil and the sign of the cross. You can only learn it and be taught. You can only teach it and learn it on Christmas Eve, I think.
That's cool.
But my nonna could do it. So when people would come over and she would do the thing. So like those things I would eventually like to incorporate in Proctor.
Yeah.
But what I have yet to be, I don't think I can nail it yet. I haven't tried. Unless maybe I did it anyway and people will see it in the book, which would be great. Like, I don't know if I'm good enough yet where I could write a proper horror, capital H horror comic.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think, and I'm trying to think of a proper horror comic that does it really well. I'm thinking like Tinian's Deviant is pretty good. Yeah. There are, and the beauty of that comic is it's all like, if you're looking at, however, I think they're like double sides. So let's just say it's double size. So let's say they're 40 pages. The horror page, it might be one every 10 pages.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so it has much more to do with timing, I think.
Yeah. And
how you can really move in those panels than anything else. And I feel like right now he's one of the best in the business at it.
Yep. I would agree.
So, I don't think I do it in Proctor. I would love to. Maybe this is me just being nervous about it and insecure, but it just seems like that's the man, this is going to come off as rude to film buffs, but I feel like in the world of film, it seems like horror is the easiest to pull off because you can just jump scare anybody at any point in time. It's why I don't watch a ton of horror too, because sometimes from watching the trailer, you can kind of get a sense of like, this is just going to be a jump scare movie and I'm really not into it.
Yep.
So it seems like a cheap trick. However, in the world of comic books, I feel like it might be the most difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah.
Because the pacing is just so much different, right? Where, you know, I could draw a terrifying looking image, but if the story doesn't move the right way, you know, it might not work. Where what's the scary stories to tell in the dark and where the sidewalk ends?
Yep.
You know, those things, some of those images, the single panel, still live in my brain today.
Yeah.
You know, the girl with the spiders that crawl out of her face.
Yeah.
I remember being in like maybe second or third grade in the library at school and just being like, I don't think we should look at this.
I'm pretty sure I showed that to my mom. Like, am I allowed to read this? Is the same thing. Yeah. And there's a handful of those where it had the poem, you know, here, and then the rest of it was this atmospheric single image that when you first see it, you also have to think when you're creating comics, like where the eye goes first. So with those, like, I'm reading this book, so I want to read the book. Like, I'm going to see the picture and I might not fully look at every detail, but then after I read the little poem or whatever, if it reveals something more that I might have missed with the picture, then I look back and it's like, oh, I didn't even see that. Like, that's not even a human. And then suddenly it takes that step into like, now I'm spooked.
Yep. And see, with comics too, the use of like sound effects, again, don't, you know, not to beat a dead horse, but the Deviant, I don't want to spoil it, but like the killer, they incorporate these sound effects, and I don't even know, it's like or something that he makes this noise, and it's written in a way like that kind of stuff. Yeah, like done the right way, it won't leave your brain.
Yep. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the Deviant because I have just been like rabidly consuming that book. It's so freaking good. Like, and I'm not a huge fan of Christmas, so anything that kind of takes Christmas and turns it a little darker, which is also shout out to Travis Gibb, another post-punk. But he's got a whole like holiday spirits where it takes a darker look at Christmas tales. And like, that's why I was drawn to that series that he did of anthology books of just like, it's Christmas and everything's happy, but like, is it?
The thought of a Santa Claus that like the Black Peter stuff, is terrifying. You know what I mean? Like that stuff is, oh God, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I love it. So let's stay with Proctor. With issue 3 and part of the like rooted in the real world, because I saw that I don't remember where I saw it. I saw that you had posted like a preview panel and it was a small shop that was probably recognizable for folks that were in a certain geographic area.
Yes. Yeah.
That you included. And so like, I was wondering, are you doing that to like, hey, love to the hometown? Or is it more just like this is a story that could be taking place exactly where you are?
It's definitely more of love for the hometown and for the city, just because but it's also, I also just love cities. I just think, especially by me, I have a lot of people that, and there's nothing against outdoorsy people, and there's nothing against like nature and all that stuff. That's great too. I go on hikes. I've done this stuff.
Yeah.
But man, there's just something about a city that is so alive. And I wanted to, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, like as much as I want to honor Philadelphia, just kind of encourage people to like look around wherever you are, right? Yeah. Like there are just things that sometimes we take for granted that we don't pay enough attention to.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. So with this third issue, like For folks that maybe are new to Proctor, set up like very high level. I won't say anything because I don't want to give anything away that you don't want to give it away. So,
Yeah.
like, set up the first two, and then what we can expect with this third issue.
Yeah, so I guess the quick pitch is, imagine if your favorite vampire slayer or demon hunter had a drinking problem and a toxic relationship with her mom. Mom is a famous witch. Dad's a famous demon hunter who passed away when Sam was younger. She's a 27-year-old with an art history degree, can't find a job, doesn't want to move back in with mom, starts hunting demons to make ends meet, and calamity ensues. In issue 1, Sam realizes that her mom has perhaps finally bit off more than she can chew, in that she found something she wasn't supposed to find, at least not yet. And a rival warlock wants what mom has found. Sam essentially doesn't necessarily save the day, but finds herself on this, like, at first she is trying to run away, and in issue 2 realizes that, well, she kind of has to come back and destroy this thing in a very Lord of the Rings, Mordor, we got to destroy this thing certain situation. And now for issue 3, she's finally going to get all the players together so that she can go destroy this thing. It's just that in issue 3, Sam will finally realize that there's a cost for being in the business that she's in. Up until that point, she's never really had to deal with cost. And it's kind of a conversation just about cost in general. Whatever there's a tax. There's always a tax. Yeah. If you want a new job, there's a cost. If you want to start a family, there's a cost. And some people are privileged enough to, and Sam is or was one of them, where, like, you look around and some people can just lackadaisically be shitheads for most of their lives. But, Father Time is undefeated. And eventually the other shoe drops. And Sam realizes in issue 3 what she actually is getting herself into when she decides at 27 years old that she wants to get into the demon hunting business. And these are this is the cost.
Okay.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's what you get for issue 3.
So is this like the end of the first arc that you've got planned, or
no? So the whole arc is 6 issues.
Okay.
So issue 3, we finally get our team, but the first real tragedy occurs. Issue 4, I guess, to keep people, people have been asking for the last year, because now I'm doing these conventions and everything else. Everybody points to the title and they're like, what's Proctor then? Like, is her name Proctor? What is this? And in issue 4, you get an explanation of the name. And it's loosely tied into Salem witch trials. If anybody has read or seen, I feel like if you went to high school in America, there's a good chance 1 year in high school you were forced to watch or read Arthur Miller's The Crucible. So there is, names will start popping up that are kind of loosely in that world. That's another movie that I guess the play isn't terrifying, but the film, there are moments in that film that are pretty scary. Yeah. Like, they do an amazing job kind of leaving you on the edge of your seat. So that was always a fun film to show kids, because they were scared, you know what I mean? In a way that they didn't expect to be scared.
Yeah. As a theater kid, I read the play and then watched the play and then only found out about the movie later, because a buddy of mine was like, dude, why'd you read it? Like, just watch the movie.
It's great. Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't even know there was a movie. Like, I enjoy reading, so it was no problem. But yeah, so he was the one that introduced me to the movie, and then we watched it. And I was like, this is, oh, Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I also love that, like, I like the Salem witch stuff.
Yeah,
Um, the movie The Witch
yeah.
is probably one of my favorite horror films of all time.
Oh, wow, okay.
Um, just because it's so like you really don't. It's one of those things where everything is just outside
Yeah,
of what you're expecting to see. You know, like you get the image in the very beginning of the film. It's like the baby, and then the baby's gone, and then the witch is like muddling something, and then the blood is being, and you're like, oh, like you're kind of
yeah,
forced to do some of the work. Which again is kind of my favorite horror.
yeah. I do
Yeah.
love when because everybody's got a different imagination, so when you have an overactive, horror-loving imagination, it's not just like, "Oh, yeah, she killed the baby." It's like, "Oh, she dismembered this," and, like, no amount of special effects or anything. Oh, come on, the movie where it was on Netflix and everybody watched it, Bird Box,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't like that movie because they showed the monster.
Hmm.
Like, they have all of these amazing reactions to what they're seeing, and then if you see you're dead. Like, let me imagine what that is,
Hmm.
because I feel like what they showed didn't live up to what I was expecting. I was like,
Yep.
"Oh, that's what it is?" And, like, it was much more suspenseful for me when I didn't see the monster. That's why I like, movies like The Mist, where, like
Yeah.
and Cloverfield. Like, Cloverfield is my favorite, like, found footage movie.
See, I have to go back and rewatch that now. Yeah.
I Man, I love that movie, and, like, the thing that they do really well is you only ever see brief glimpses of the monster until maybe the last like 10 minutes. And everything else is the reaction to the
Yeah.
terror of like avoiding it, staying out of its way, all those things. But not showing it all the time gives you something where your imagination just runs wild. And because you're only ever seeing it like duck behind a building or, disappearing under the water or whatever, like that's where your imagination then takes over. And so this whole movie, you're like, they're running from this massive, like Cthulhu type monster. And then you see it and it actually doesn't disappoint because
Yeah.
then you see the whole thing and you're like, oh no, yeah, okay, that's terrifying.
Yeah. You know, it was kind of like that, if I'm remembering it correctly. 28 Days Later as a zombie
Ooh,
film, I feel like
they flipped zombies on their head.
was like you again as the V. I feel like you do all the work in that movie for a considerable amount of time.
Yeah.
And then I think the first scariest part, if I'm remembering correctly, is like a car alarm goes off and then the woman kills the guy. I think she like hatchets him to death or something in the very
Yeah.
beginning. And yeah, it's just the more work the viewer has to do, the better, in my opinion.
Yep. I agree.
Um, and again, which is why the comic book stuff is so it's kind of hard, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
you don't want to give too much away with the art, and yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack. And
Hmm.
especially as someone, so I have started doing like a bunch of research. I have the thing that I want to tell. I just don't know how to translate it. I want it to be horror based. But again, like I by no means think that my like first real stab at a substantial story is going to be anything terrifying. But it's like how do I incorporate horror into and make this monster that like I've learned about, how do I bring that to light, but then also make it so that it's not just about seeing the monster because I
Yeah,
don't want that because I love movies like Cloverfield, like The Descent. That's easily like in my top 2 horror of all time because it's so claustrophobic and the monsters aren't the only monsters in the movie. And like just that whole aspect of seeing how terrible everything is and
yeah,
just feeling so cramped all the time. I just think it's executed so freaking well that like, how do you do that with a new idea that hasn't been explored or that's been lost in mythology for 3,000 years. Like,
And
how do you bring that to light? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And it is not easy.
I mean, listen, there's a reason. Like when I first decided to do this stuff, I looked for horror comics. You know what I mean? Because I did want to explore all of the things. Like I read Buffy comics, and to see like how that was sort of like you want to live in the medium a little bit, right? Live in the
Yeah.
medium, live in the genre, so that you can kind of play around. And I just remember never being super happy with even like I read and this isn't a knock on the book. The book's amazing. Have you read The Beauty?
No, but it's on my like pull list. I use a digital library app for like digital reading. It's
Okay.
on my list there. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Should I
It's
bump that to the top?
it's very good. I'm bringing it up because I believe Scott Snyder writes the foreword or writes a review, and it reads something along the lines of it's something. The whole thing is about like Snyder's write up is about like the horror genre and why this book is such a good horror comic. I don't think it's a horror comic. Like, I don't think it's a horror comic at all. At no point in time was I scared. I couldn't even like, you know how people call like Silence of the Lambs a horror film sometimes, but I feel like it's a little bit more like thriller.
Yeah.
I was even trying to give it like the benefit of the doubt that like, oh, maybe he meant horror the way Silence of the Lambs is horror. Essentially the story is like, there's a new venereal disease that makes you beautiful. And everybody wants it. But the only problem is, in like issue 1, someone bursts into flames that has it. And you realize like it speeds up your metabolism. So now there's this thing where like beauties are just bursting into flames. And then there's like a beauty murderer and there's all this stuff happening. But like at no point in time did I consider it horror. And I'm mentioning all that because I think Scott Snyder is one of the best at what he does. But if I don't agree with what he considers to be horror, it's hard for me to find a horror book that I like if even the recommendations are kind of all over the place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody, like to your point earlier with the, and this is perfect timing that Raphael just sounded off. So the first panel that I did, I was talking about like, what's your favorite type of horror? And he loves the body horror, the gory stuff like that. And as he was saying, I was like, man, I can't rain on his parade, but like, that doesn't do it for me.
Right.
But like, to what you said too, for you, yours is like, let the imagination do the work, let the viewer do the work, give me the supernatural stuff. I love the found footage, the like not explaining everything.
Yeah.
Horror, like, don't explain everything and spoon feed it to me. Like, let me figure some of it out. And I think that's that imagination piece. And like hauntings and possessions are the two that just stick with me. And so for me, that's the like, oh, so is that what I find to be horror? Like, is horror defined differently by all the people? So like to his point with Silence of the Lambs, like I don't consider it horror. I feel like it's more of a suspenseful drama.
Yeah.
It's really about their relationship and her figuring out like, well, how does he tick?
Yeah.
And him trying to get into her, like it doesn't feel like it's objectively horrific.
Right.
Other than like we're seeing into the mind of a total psychopath.
Yeah.
And Anthony Hopkins just eats up the screen.
Right.
He is excellent, but I don't think it's horror.
The same way that I don't think, and this is one of my favorite, I guess, classic films of all time. Speaking of Hitchcock, Rear Window.
Oh yeah,
is just a beautifully done film.
Yeah.
is it horror? I
Is
don't
it horror?
I don't know if it's horror or is it thriller suspense.
Yeah.
But that's another good movie that layers it, where like there's some moral conversations there. There's
Mhm.
conversations about love. There's conversations about, but as much as I love some of it, I'm like, I don't know if that is horror as much as like this is another movie that scared the piss out of me when I was a kid, and I'm embarrassed about it. Dude, Ernest Scared Stupid scared me when I was a kid. Like,
That got my wife too.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, there are movies that for some reason for me are hard H horror. Even I guess it's a horror comedy, but like there's something about some of the things that are done
Mhm.
that just lives with me. You know what? Now that we're talking, like these other titles are like rushing into my head. The Gate. Have you
Ooh,
seen The Gate?
I haven't seen The Gate.
Bro, so wait, and this is like I don't know what's happening right now. This is like therapy. Everything's like
I love it.
spilling out of me.
Yeah.
I believe that I first saw The Gate in elementary school. Like I am fairly certain that one of our elementary school teachers got it from our elementary school library and we watched it. And I'm pretty sure she shouldn't have. Pretty sure she shouldn't have. But again, like that was a lot. Your mind does, they're playing a demonic record backwards, and there are
Is that where
these
that came from?
demons that come out of it's so, I don't know. It's so intoxicating, I guess I'll say, when these ideas just kind of jump in and live it like witches. Do you remember the movie The Witches
Yeah.
with the mice? They turn the kids into mice.
Yeah.
Like the prosthetic face, those faces, still
Yep.
terrifying.
Yep.
Absolutely terrifying.
So
Yeah.
one of the things, and I don't remember when this came up, but I remember asking, like, with horror that's executed well, do you feel like there needs to be like that type of twist to catch you off guard? Like, do you think that that's a pivotal piece of horror? Or do you think horror, like really excellent horror, can be done without having some sort of twist, turn, gotcha moment, like anything like that? Like at the end of Phantasm. And I say this because I just watched it after talking to the Soto Bros who are coming on next week. Because Ben loves that movie. I think it was Ben. And I was like, man, I don't remember seeing that movie, but like I'm sure I can find it. And so I actually just watched it like in the past week. And the ending of it, you think that the bad guy loses and that the kid gets out and everything's fine. And then the end of the movie flips it, and like the kid gets sucked in by the mirror and it turns from the reflection and you see the old man that was trying to get him the whole movie. And so like the villain wins in that movie. Spoiler alert, it's a 50-year-old movie. If you haven't seen it, it's
I've
on
never
you.
seen it. I've never seen it, but I'm thinking about like the twists, and I'll say this: you probably grew up on this too. Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Mm-hmm.
Was a horror TV show that kind of made its bones on those twists. Almost
Yeah.
every single one of them, I think. Every episode had a twist, right? So now that you're asking me the question, I think that is a must for the best horror films.
Mm.
I do. I think there's got to be, and I don't know how. I think the delivery is different every time. Like I don't think it always has to be like a hard twist, but I think by the end of it, it's got to be a little at least open ended. Yeah, I think so. I think that has to be a thing. But I also think that's just good storytelling, though.
Yeah.
I think the best stories kind of do that. Like, I think Pet Cemetery does it. That was another one.
The first one I remember was The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
I remember hearing like everyone was just like, "Oh, that ending," and it was well, don't stop, like I'm gonna see it.
Yeah.
Don't tell me, like I want to be caught off guard. And so the first time I watched it, I feel like I kind of figured it out about halfway through because I'd heard everybody telling like, "Oh, the ending though, they're so crazy."
I had it spoiled for me.
Ah, such a bummer,
I
man.
know. I missed. That's like one of the. If I had it, like, I mean, if I had a time machine, the only thing I change about my life is not knowing about, like, you know.
Go back
But
and see that opening night.
yeah, like, you know, that was one of them. But again, I think that speaks to, I think when it's done right, because I'm not a huge M. Night Shyamalan fan.
Same.
Um, I didn't love Signs. He produced a movie called Devil
Yeah.
that all like takes place in an elevator. The entire that's pretty good. But yeah, I think so. That's a good. Okay, so M. Night Shyamalan's a good example of like just because you have a twist doesn't make it good too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Um,
What
because
was his movie that there's this mysterious thing that was causing people to commit suicide in really awful ways?
the it's not the event, but it's
Is it The Happening?
the happening. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was like the plants were releasing
Yeah.
toxins into the air, and that was what was causing
Yeah.
people to take their own lives. Yeah.
Not a
Yep.
fan.
Mm-mm.
I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, so it's plants."
Yep.
Oh, got it. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
They're just running from the air the
Yeah.
entire film.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, like that wasn't, and even like Final. I'm trying to think of these other movies, like Final Destination. I think there was a twist at the end.
Yeah.
Um, and now I'm trying to think of anything that doesn't have a twist that was just good and open ended.
Kind of did you see Midsommar? Midsummer?
I did.
824?
That was one of those movies. I saw that in theaters. I just that was just too. I felt like that was too trauma porn
Yeah.
esque. Like it leaned too much into that. I feel like is that Ari Aster?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like that's another like genre of horror almost. Because I think was it Heredity or
Yep.
Hereditary?
Yep.
And then I don't know if he did The Green Knight, but that was I think the same guy who did The Witch. But there's that genre of horror, thriller, suspense, spooky type thing that I don't necessarily love.
824 is very hit or miss for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that Hereditary and Midsummer were misses for you because those are the two that I'm like, I really liked those.
Okay.
But like everything else that they've done, just about, I'm like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's like an intellectual wall for me of just
right.
like, man, that's too abstract.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But like for me, the reason that I liked Midsummer was because everything happened in daylight. Like everything was
Oh.
bright, everything was very happy, everything was very, and it was so good that it was like, it was just the whole time I was just very unsettled of like, this is not right. What is not right? Like, what is, and then the further it got into it, then it started being like, oh, this is what's wrong. And there's still these like bright, happy daytime people. Like, what the hell?
I never thought of that's yeah.
I like that contrast
Yeah.
because I was like, this is sold as a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
So what's scary about it? Like it's everything's during the day. What's like, oh, and so then
Yeah.
I was constantly the imagination piece, like I was constantly looking for what was wrong. And then it got to the point where I was like, oh, these people are nuts.
Yeah. Oh,
God.
when she goes into the shed and the guy's like lungs are
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I guess other side of that coin, a movie where it's dark the whole time, 30 Days a Night.
Yeah.
That I love. What's his name? Ben Forrester. He's the guy in the jail cell.
Okay.
That's like talking about the fact that these vampires are coming.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And that was a comic. which I have not read. I should probably, as from like,
you should, yeah,
Yeah.
because it translates very well
yeah,
to the comic because of the use of heavy blacks, and like it's still very contrasting. It's a very dark, like
yeah,
not like thematically dark, like visibly it's a dark comic,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it works really well as a comic. So it started as a novel series,
Oh,
got adapted into sorry, this is I'm changing I'm changing titles. It's The Strain by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan.
never read it.
So 3 books got turned into a TV show and adapted by Dark Horse into a 3-volume comic.
Okay.
I love all of it.
Wow, really?
The TV show is the one that misses the most for me,
Okay.
but I think that's just because I'm one of like I love the books so much that I just wanted to be able to read. Like, there's always going to be stuff that gets missed and cut out, and all like always. It
Right.
doesn't matter if it's a movie, a TV show, whatever. But this stuff, like the books, are just so freaking good, and the comics. I forget who the creative team was that adapted it, but they did so well. It's very much like you can almost follow it beat by beat, novel to the comics.
Really?
And it works so well.
Okay.
And it's a very fresh take on vampires.
Okay.
So yeah, if you've got the time, because
I'm writing it down.
The audiobooks are excellent. I bought the books and then I was like, what am I doing? I need to listen to these. And so I listened to the audiobooks. But that's one of the few book series that I've listened to multiple times.
Okay.
Because it's just like, I'm a huge Del Toro fan. I think he makes very good monsters. And so working with Chuck Hogan and then creating this novel series and then adapting it to TV, getting to flex the like, this is my wheelhouse now. And both he and Chuck Hogan were like involved in creating the TV show and the comics. So I think that's why it stays so true.
And he blew up. Pan's Labyrinth, right? Is him?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I saw that in theaters, and I didn't know that was going to be a subtitled film.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a good example of not knowing anything about anything other than hearing about it and going and see it, and it paying off huge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super. That's another, like, as far as foreign language flicks, that's usually like that one. There's a movie that's been adapted a bajillion times now called The Experiment.
Okay.
I don't know if it originated as a German flick and then got adapted to American or vice versa. And actually I just bought it on DVD, the American version, because I haven't seen the American one. But it takes 24 volunteers to take place in a 90-day experiment where half of them are prisoners and half of them are the guards. And so it examines like the power of like responsibility, and they had to call it's based on a real thing.
Yes,
like
I remember. Yes.
And that's horror as well, but not in the like, oh my gosh, they're violently attacking each other. It's the like
psychological aspect of it all.
Yeah, like just the depravity of humans.
Yeah. Yo, have you seen The Menu?
No, I have heard that I should, but I haven't seen it yet.
That's one, like the psychological. I would put that in that. Again, this one's not based on a true story at all, but I think it plays around with that a lot.
Okay,
just the psychology of what type of people want to work at a restaurant like Noma and spend the money that they have to spend to work in these restaurants, to eat at these restaurants. And it's a pretty cool social commentary, but also in some moments just outwardly terrifying.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I dig it. Yeah, I will definitely add that and The Gate onto my bump those up my list, because The Gate wasn't even on my radar. So
I think it's called The Gate. I'm pretty sure.
I feel like I can see the cover of it, because I worked at Hollywood Video in college as a manager, and
greatest college job ever.
So good. That and the radio station at the same time. Like,
Nice.
man, I I don't know how I was living that life. But yeah, I tried to rent like every movie in our horror section,
Okay.
and we ended up closing before I got through everything. And so I must not have gotten to the gate.
Yeah.
But I feel like I can see, you know what? I have the technology. I'm just gonna Google it right
Yeah,
now.
do it.
It's
Give it a, let me see,
1987 film. See, this is not what I thought it was.
oh yeah, that's the right movie though.
Let me do this, and then I'm just going to present so that everybody can see. Share screen, images. Is that the cover? Is that it? Oh, I didn't add it. It would help if I would add it to the stage.
Yes, that's it, man.
That's it.
And these like those like little demons that are crowded around him.
Yeah.
They are it's just like at least from what I remember. Like it's been so long. It's been probably 25 years since I've seen the film.
Okay.
But I remember that they're a claymation.
Oh, cool.
So it's that like creepy, almost like it reminds me of like the horror, not the horror, like the body horror moments of Pet Sematary, where it kind of moves to claymation type thing, where you eat the knife and the Achilles tendons and the that's, but this movie, man,
great.
Definitely should not have been watching that. Man,
I love that you did anyway. And like now look at us. We're, well-adjusted adults.
I was just gonna say, yeah. It's fine.
That still love horror and could talk for hours about it. So that's the my official stuff that I wanted to talk about, because I knew that we were just gonna riff about horror stuff. Like, I love horror. I just do. And I never thought about why. I was just to plug some pals. I was on the Vigilante Vibes podcast.
Okay.
Max and Megan, and who are also part of the Nerd Initiative Creator Bullpen. Man, 2 hits. So I was on their show and I was talking about horror and horror comics, and I've had a decent amount of guests here on the show that are also creating horror comics. And Max was like, well, what about horror? You've mentioned it a few times. So why horror? And I was like, I've never thought about that question before in my life.
Did you grow up in a religious home?
And so we grew up Catholic.
Same.
I now say I'm a recovering Catholic, because I was the good altar boy, did all the things. And I just still dealt with death and divorce and awful things that just were I'm doing what I thought I was being taught to do. And this doesn't work out. And it's because for me, Catholicism is about the religion, not the relationship.
Right.
And at its core, I think any time you talk about religion, and it should be about your relationship with your creator, not the rules that are placed around it by people.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that plays into it. I think that's definitely why the possession, exorcism, ghost haunting things, I think that's why those are the movies that stand out to me.
Yeah.
Because it's that's not natural. That's not how that's supposed to work. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I think that's why I like it so much. I grew up Catholic, and my mom was very much so. My dad was not strict at all in regards to that, but my mom was definitely the authoritarian in the house about you're going to church. I don't know if you went to CCD. It was a Wednesday for us. It's if you didn't go to Catholic school, but you wanted your parents wanted you to make all the sacraments, you did an after school program. And for us, it was every Wednesday from 7 to 8 o'clock during every school year up through 8th grade. Okay. And I think it was the first horror films, and the idea of horror was the first it was the first conversation that I felt like I was a part of that took the thing that was so certain and turned it on its head. If this is the absolute capital T truth, so much so that I have to go to school after school,
Yeah.
and do all this stuff. But what about all this other stuff? And I guess the crazier stuff was like, the vampires and ghouls and werewolves. Like, okay, but the closer stuff was like the possessions, the Padre Pio stuff. And you're like, wait a minute, is this like the idea of the Catholic Church having an exorcist team? Like, and then my brain's like, well, if there is an exorcist department and there were witches, like, then you start, okay, well, now we have werewolves. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if exorcism, then 100% werewolves,
Yep.
So
Vlad the Impaler was Dracula. Got it. Okay.
100%.
Great.
There's no doubt and that's what I think is so fun about horror is you start to it's just this slippery little slope. Like I read again, like trying to do all the things for the horror-ish comic book stuff. I just finished volume 1 compendium of Hellboy.
Okay.
And I'm not a huge Mignola fan, but I do think it's required reading, period, for anybody that wants to write horror or wants to write short runs. Like if you want to know how to write a 4-issue story or a 1-issue story, read Hellboy, because that's what most of it is. And again, like that plays it fast and loose. Like I like the idea of a heaven and a hell, but then are there portals and can they get through? And if they can, it's why I love the movie Constantine.
Yeah.
That stuff is just fascinating. But I think the interest comes from just being told to go say 4 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, and you know what I mean? Like, I think that's it. So I blame my mom. Long story short.
So thanks, Mom. Yeah, that's I can do the same thing because she was the other one for me that was like, no, we're going to church. We're doing like I did the whole Catholic school thing. So like, I didn't have it just 1 hour once a week. I had it 7.5 hours, 5 days a week. Like it was woven through everything.
Yeah.
So, and then we still had after school things, and that it was more, and like music was after school. And so if you were part of the choir, like you were singing the religious hymns and all of those things. And so then it was like, well, why are we singing these words? Well, let me teach you why. And then learning about Latin and like all of this stuff. And it was, so once I got to high school, part of that like rebellion part was where we lived, I was part of like 5 school systems. So I could have gone to, I think, 7 different high schools. Whereas most people are like, oh no, I went to grade school and I went to our high school.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I can go to like any of them. So I don't have to go to the Catholic high school. I'm going to go to the public school where my buddies in my neighborhood go. And that's where I'm going to go. And so that's what I did. And then that was the start of a lot of just rebellious stuff for me. And then, in college, I was like, something's missing. Maybe I should give this church thing a try. And so then I did, and then it was like, oh, this makes total sense. And so like that's how I ended up the full circle after I was like, well, I did this like high school, early college living for me thing. And didn't experience any additional joy, still had death, still had terrible things, still anxiety, still depression, like all this nonsense. Ended up finding out I was going to be a dad at 19, like all of these things that just shook life and like threw them up in the air. And then I was like, okay, well, I need somewhere to land. Like I don't have anywhere to land. And so like I found that in a non-Catholic Christian church and was like, oh yeah, no, this is totally what I've been missing.
This is cool. Yeah.
And all that to say, like, yes, horror is great. I apologize, K-pop. Like we have been talking horror and now we're in this weird in this separate horror adjacent conversation. But like that's the beauty of being live is we can talk about this stuff, and especially with somebody that I've had on the show before, because we already have that pre-existing, like the ice is broken, and we've been talking since. So like now we're just hanging out as 2 bros. So
wait, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick what your favorite, trying to think of the best way to sort of frame this. do you always, if you had to pick between like religious horror, horror science fiction, like where is like your bread and butter? Like there's 5 movies, all horror playing this weekend. Which one do you go see?
That's hard. My knee-jerk reaction is I'm gonna go see the sci-fi horror because I've always loved sci-fi, and it pushes horror in a direction that like regular horror can't go, because then you can suddenly make up everything.
Right.
Right? Like if you have a monster horror, you still have a monster, but it's scary because it's the only one of its kind. Everything else is regular people. So like you have to ground monster horror like on Earth. Sci-fi horror, you can push it into a spaceship that's floating in space, and you're trying to figure out how to live, and then you find out like, oh no, our ship has been inhabited by this other thing. Like what the hell? And you can make up whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so like my natural bent is to go sci-fi. That's like my default, and I'm comfortable with that. Recently, I find that I am chasing after like psychological horror. That's what I want to see. I want to see where it's like, oh, this is terrifying, not just because the images are terrifying, but like the idea is unsettling. And like I just watched Rosemary's Baby. I had never seen it. And so the whole movie, I was like, what the hell? Like, this is like that movie Mother with Jennifer Lawrence, where like everything is just out of her control and this sucks. And I was getting very frustrated. And then you find out at the end, like, oh, they're a cult of Satanists. Got it. Okay. Like that makes sense. And then it was like, oh God, they're a cult of Satanists. And then it's like, well, those people are real. Like that's taken from reality. There's real people that are part of that. And so then that piece of it is what then I end up sitting with of like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And then the more that I thought about the movie, initially I was like, oh, that was stupid. Like it was way too long. I didn't like it. The turn was good, but like, that's it. So 3 out of 10. But then the more that I think about it, the more I was like, yeah, but I was frustrated. Like I was angry watching that movie, and I was unsettled. And like, that only means that it did its job. It wasn't supposed to like shock scare.
Right.
It was definitely supposed to like weave into your brain and stick with you. And the fact that I'm still talking about it tells me like it did its job.
Yeah.
And it came out at a time where like Satanist cults were like all the rage, and everybody was scared about it. And so I have to like, I like going back and doing a retrospective on horror. So every October I start in like the 1890s when the first horror films, like 7-minute long YouTube videos or whatever, were being made, and then I watch a different horror movie every decade, because horror has changed what we perceive to be horrifying. So like a cult of Satanists in the 70s was terrifying. Like that's the worst possible thing ever. And then you get to Midsummer, right? Like 2021, I think, or something. I don't know. Time's weird. In the last 10 years, Midsummer came out, and it's still the idea of a cult, but instead of being Satanists, it's a fear of other.
Right.
Because they're a culture of people that live in a different country and have a very different faith and folklore, horror thing that they believe and live by. That's like the horror of the unknown suddenly is now what's scary. And so like I like horror that you have to kind of think about, but I don't like abstract horror. Like I do not like Eraserhead at all. I don't like David Lynch.
Oh, I don't think I've watched it. I've never seen Eraserhead.
That's his like.
I've seen Mulholland Drive, which I was like, that's just not for me.
Yeah, and like that's how I felt about Eraserhead, where it's a very polarizing movie. Either you love it or you just don't at all. And I'm the latter. It was not for me. I don't care. I don't think it's scary. It's just too weird, and I don't feel like any of it fit together.
I felt that way about Hellraiser.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was like, it was just again, too abstract for me.
Yeah, Yeah, I appreciate the horror imagery used in Hellraiser, and it's definitely like terrifying that they are these like authors of eternal pain and
Right.
suffering.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that idea is scary, but
Right,
like
that's true.
for the movie, that's it.
Yeah, I remember why. Again, it kind of, yeah, like that could have been a 10-minute movie
Yeah.
and been real. Speaking of 10-minute movies, um, quick plug. There's a my buddy from high school started a production company called Black Ab Films,
Okay.
and he just released these shorts. The horror series is called Flicker, and it takes place in a hotel stairwell, and the lights are just flickering off and on.
Oh.
And through each episode, something else pops up. In episode one, something, and it's just such a fun psychological thing of just being like, oh man, like you go into a stairwell, you can't get out of it, and the lights go off, and there's something in there with you. Hmm.
Hmm,
You
don't
know,
like that.
and right, like, I don't like that at all. You know what I mean? But that's like a great example of kind of the psychological stuff that will stick with you.
Yeah.
I mean, me just saying that, the next time I'm in a hotel, you kind of like look around, and you're like, or the thought of just being stuck in an elevator, all that stuff.
Yeah, and that's why that movie Devil, like I
Right.
liked it because I guess I like claustrophobic horror
Yeah.
because the descent and devil like where you're trapped in something.
The first Saw is essentially in one room the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I if claustrophobic horror isn't a thing yet, it should be, and that's what I like. So but I'm an aesthetic nerd. Like if you block off and you force perspective,
Yeah.
suddenly it's like, oh, well, why can't I see like your body subconsciously understands there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't see the whole picture. Why? And then the whole time you're trying to get it. And then if you finally do get the full picture and everything's wrong, then it's like, oh, that's why.
Do you like, I mean, I haven't seen it since high school, so I don't even remember most of it. The Abyss is probably another one, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's probably worth revisiting.
Yeah.
Because then there's like rumors about that film, right? Like people having panic attacks on set and just being underwater, like all that stuff kind of gets you going.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's definitely the like, and I wouldn't want to have like as an actor or having done it, I'm not a current actor, but like I would hate to hear the directors were doing terrible things to their cast to get better performances out of them.
Yeah.
But also, if I ignore that and I just watch a movie and I see those reactions, I'm kind of okay with it. Like with the Die Hard, right? When he drops Hans Gruber off Nakatomi Plaza, Alan Rickman thought that he was going to hit the squish mat sooner than he did.
Oh, really?
So the look of like, oh God, is real because they somehow dropped him from higher without him knowing or something. Where like the stunt that they had planned that they told him, like, yeah, you're only going to drop like 5 feet. He dropped like 20 feet. And so the look of like, whoa, wow, there's definitely a secondary reaction. And that's when he was supposed to or was expecting to hit the cushion and didn't.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm a big Die Hard nerd. Like I watch the movie every year as I put up the Christmas tree because it's a Christmas movie.
Of course.
And so but yeah, I like the result of being able to get that because it feels natural. I will forever love practical effects over CGI. Like I just will.
Yeah.
And going back and watching movies like Lake Placid, where it's like, oh, that's not an alligator. That's not even close.
Even I Am Legend.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, the book is amazing.
Yes.
Like I think that was one of the first stories that I read that got me interested in writing horror. And I think it was because I remember reading maybe Stephen King had said like everything you need to learn, you can learn from Matheson. Like just read hit, like you know, and I remember just loving the book, but watching the film, and I love everything about that film except the CGI vampires.
Yep.
Because you're looking at, guys, you could have done this. Your budget is huge. You could have done this a billion different ways, man.
Yeah.
But you went with this like CGI thing that I feel like it's jarring. So, you know what I mean? It just rips you out of. I feel like the scariest parts of I Am Legend are the parts where when you see oh man, it's like Will Smith, when he sees the mannequin where it's not supposed to be.
Yes.
I remember seeing that in theaters and just being like,
yeah. Oh no.
what? Like my hair, like everything just going haywire. And again, I think that's the beauty of doing it some moments right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it can be done well, but to go non-horror, I'm happy to hear that Marvel is going to be stepping back from using and relying so much on CGI with their new or like upcoming projects, because they have to scale down the budget, and a lot of the budget that they were using was on CGI. And so instead of doing that, they're going to be more practical and like, I don't know, film on location instead of in a giant green room. Like I'm excited for that. And not to say like it's Marvel. That stuff's incredible. Like the CGI is beautiful. And a lot of it, you can't tell that it's CGI, but not everybody has the Marvel Studios budget. And so it can definitely like, oh, what is that? As it happens. Right. And then suddenly you're not thinking about like, which is another reason why I think I like movies that make you figure it out. Like had Bird Box not had shown the monsters, I would have not been taken out of it. Like, oh, that's what they went with.
Right. And it would have saved them a ton of money.
And it would have saved them a ton of money.
You know,
but then movies like The Ritual, where they only really show the monster in like the final act of the movie.
Yeah.
It's done really well because the whole time you hear it, you know, they get glimpses of it off screen, but then you don't fully see it. And even when you do see it, it's only like the silhouette in front of a burning building. And so even then it's very minimally used, but it's still effectively done. And like, it's just a challenge to find that balance. And I didn't even like love The Ritual.
But I've never seen it. I know of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I mean it's an outdoor. It's definitely one that I was drawn to because it's like a bunch of hikers in nature, and there's so much of the world that we just don't know about.
Yeah,
that I'm never gonna say like, oh yeah, we know every species of everything everywhere. Like I'm not gonna ever definitively say like there's no Bigfoot. Maybe there is. Right. You know, like there's acres and acres and acres of woods that like. One trip to my sister's place out in Montana and then looking at the mountains, it was just like, how would you ever begin to explore one of these?
It gets real
in one lifetime. Yeah. Like let alone, you go on a hiking trail and you go off the beaten path because this one has a better view. And then you go off that beaten path and you're suddenly like, I'm here with my family. They're not going to kill me out here. Like no one would hear me out here scream.
Yeah. And that's the fun part about the horror stuff, right? Again, it lives in your head.
Yeah.
You know, like, have you seen, oh man, I think it's called Silver Bullet. It's a werewolf film.
I just heard about that on the last horror panel I did.
So that's another one where there's a guy and he's a werewolf, but we never see him as the werewolf really until like, I think the very end, maybe. I don't even remember when we get the werewolf, but it's a horror film, you know? And And I think that's another example of like when we talk about budget, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You could spend $100 million on CGI, but you know, do we really need to have like? If I'm hoping they definitely don't go with any CGI stuff for Daredevil, they easily could to make the character more acrobatic and doing these, because I feel like the first Daredevil film with Ben Affleck, there was a ton of like CGI acrobatics, if I'm remembering it correctly.
You are, yeah.
Yeah. And you're just like, we don't need that. We just don't need it. And when it's done the right way, I think it can land for sure.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah,
that's like the Superman's mustache. Like Henry Cavill, they had to CGI out the mustache because he had it for another movie that he was shooting.
Stop that. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it cost like 20 something in some ridiculous millions of dollars to CGI out the mustache because he couldn't shave it because they had to do like reshoots for some of the scenes from one of the recent Henry Cavill Superman movies. And they CGI it out because he couldn't, because they were actively shooting his next movie where he had grown it all out for. And so like just CGIing out his upper lip cost millions of dollars.
Yeah, see, we're hitting the wrong targets, guys. We're
Uh-huh.
we're hitting the wrong targets. Oh.
Yeah. So but I think that something that Proctor does very well is you've taken all of these supernatural elements, you've put them into a world that feels like it's real and that it can exist, and then playing with some of the tropes at the same time, like pushing the character forward, I think is done really well. And I am stoked that issue 3 is back, and to hear that you have a plan for 6 issues, because you've got me hooked. Like I'm in for all of it.
Dude, thank you.
Like Sam very much feels like someone that I would have hung out with in high school and driven to the house in the middle of Milford nowhere. Like she would have been in that car. So
yes, she absolutely would have been in that car.
Yeah. So I love it. I think it's great. I hope nothing but the best, like smash all of the stretch goals and all of the things. Any closing thoughts, feelings, words, anything like that?
No, just if anybody's on the fence about backing the project, please back it sooner than later. This week like week 3 for Kickstarters are they're notoriously slow. We're about $1,100 away from hitting our goal. And people keep telling me that they're gonna like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it. I can't wait to read it. And then they're going to probably wait until like the last 48 hours. And all that does is give me anxiety. So please, any contribution would be much appreciated. I tell people that all of the money raised during this Kickstarter is used to essentially fund the next book. I've had conversations with Ricardo. We are starting issue 4 immediately. So there's not going to be any downtime. Sebastian Gerner has come on as an editor. I'm very, very excited to have him a part of the team. So we're going to get his eyes on some things. So some additional creative perspective is going to be welcome. But dude, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, man. This is, as always, this is a blast. Anytime I can hang out with you and talk about pretty much anything
at all.
I'm in, dog.
Awesome. Well, hopefully come maybe the issue 4 Kickstarter, we can make schedules work and timing work to get Ricardo on here as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he apologizes. So right now it's like 3 a.m. And he's wrapping up the last day of his vacation. And he's got a little baby, so he's kind of he was on board until, I guess, much like parenthood, such as it is, he was on board until he wasn't. Was like, dude, I cannot do this. So no
worries at all. I get it. Like once you said he was on vacation, I was like, there's no way. Like,
yeah,
dude, enjoy the vacation. There's no way. So you're always going to be on my list of like, hey, if you want to come back, let's go. Like, let's
appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Carmen, for hanging out with me again. The link to the Kickstarter is in this episode description. So if you're watching or listening, you can find it very easily with 2 taps and you're there. Check it out. Back it now. Save his anxiety. We want to keep that hair nice and dark. We don't want him to end up with as much gray as I have. And all things considered, this was a blast, dude. I love talking horror and chopping it up with post-punk. So
thanks, bro.
That's going to be it for this episode. Stay tuned. We have one more horror panel. It's coming at you next Sunday. We're streaming live at 8 o'clock with 3 post punks as of right now that are scheduled, and it's going to be a good one. So stay tuned for that. But for now, go do what's good for you, punks, and read some horror comics. We're out of here.